Hello, MDI mentors. I'm Steve Lorenz. I'm co-founder and also co-director of Mentoring and Consulting. And welcome to the adventure of looking at, through MDI's lens, at strategic planning.
I'm Marty Scudder, and I'm also co-director of Mentoring and Consulting and co-founder. And I'm so glad you're here. I also want you to know that Heather Carls, MDI's executive director, and Troy Wall, one of our senior mentors, will be joining us today.
MDI is being asked more and more to do strategic planning for organizations. This strategic planning can come in different forms. It can be a day retreat, which is a normal thing to do, or a day and a half retreat. But sometimes we have to do it in segments. But we prefer not to do it in segments because it's hard to have the flow of this segment flow into this segment, because there's so much time in between. But it can be done. Strategic planning is not really that complicated. We do it every day unconsciously. If we walk into a grocery store, we stop and we think strategically, okay, how am I going to attack this store so that I can do it in the most efficient way possible? So my plan becomes, I'm going to start over here in produce, and I'm going to work my way down to dairy. And if I walk past the coffee aisle, a couple aisles, and I realize I didn't get my filters, it is not a big deal to just pause, go back and get the coffee filters, put them in the cart, and proceed with the plan. And that's the way it works with organizations as well. If we're running errands on Saturday morning, we start out by saying, well, we don't want to drive any more around the town than we have to, so let's think about a geographical pattern to make these errands. Then we think, okay, maybe one errand needs to be done because it affects another errand, so we have to change that sequence. But once we come up with the sequence, it's just a routine thing for us to just start off and accomplish the plan that we made for that Saturday morning in sequence. Our leaders are dealing day to day with the tyranny of the urgent. They are affected by the personalities, by the different issues that are going on in the office, and it's very difficult for them to step back and take a 30,000 foot view of their organization and look at it in an objective way. And that is the reason why they go to outside people to do strategic planning for them. And that's where, of course, where MDI comes in. So here we go. We are going to lead you through the process of looking through MDI's lens at successful strategic planning.
As Steve said, strategic planning is one of the most frequently requested services of MDI's mentors and consultants. We always customize it, and so today what we want to do is introduce you to the process. It's different for every leader client. We want to equip you with a framework to lead this process in any type of circumstance. So we're going to start out with some basic tools that we're going to give you that will help you in the process. For one thing, we're going to identify when strategic planning would be beneficial for your leader client. We're going to navigate the relationship dynamics involved in the process, including the ability to unify a contentious staff. We want you to know your goals as a mentor consultant throughout the whole process and help you focus an organization on a clear path for a stated time in the future. You're going to be charting the course for the future or helping focus a team on a transition that they're going to go through right now. Either way, it's all part of the strategic planning process. Why is this so important? We've seen the strategic planning process make foundational and revolutionary shifts within ministries over time that allow leaders to operate in their strengths and really relieve them of a lot of the anxiety and the feeling of being overwhelmed in their ministries. God has continued to use this process to move mountains, to repair fractured relationships, to launch new God-breathed initiatives, and to ignite leadership teams with passion and a unified vision. The work you do as a mentor consultant in this whole process is more valuable than you will ever know. As long as you open yourself up to the leading of the Holy Spirit, and because He will accomplish His purposes for each ministry that you work with. The more as you go through the process, more and more, you will be awed and amazed at what He does as He follows you and as you follow Him through your obedience, your leadership, and your presence. We have a great example of this with Taylor Cochran, who's the Executive Director of Bless the Children Ministries, and we want to share that with you.
So it's incredible to walk away with like the plan of action, the unity in relationships, and I think just a renewed sense of vision and momentum for our ministry.
One of the things we have to realize that we as mentors have goals that we need to achieve during this process. The first one says, give the leadership team space to hear the Holy Spirit leading for the future. This section is so important, and we're doing a separate discussion on this later, so I'm not going to cover this now. The second one is be mindful of your leader's priorities in the strategic planning process. It's really important for you ahead of time, in a complete way, to communicate with your leader client and make sure that you know exactly what it is that they want to come out of this process and what it is that they're interested in. If they have prejudices or ideas or thoughts and they're really, really, really hoping that some particular thing happens, we need to know about that so that we can champion it at the right moment. The next one is be aware of how your leader wants or needs to be positioned in the strategic planning process. This is something that's subtly very important. Last year we did a retreat, a strategic planning retreat, that where the leader was new and was not confident and wasn't really comfortable in standing before his board of directors, and so MDI took the lead, and we kept him in his seat pretty much the time. We would refer to him to give him presence in the room, but we would not have him get up and talk. This year is totally different. Because he's had a year experience and he's now very confident in what he's doing, the board is loving him and following his direction, we are having him do a State of the Union talk at the beginning of the strategic planning time. This gives him a chance to update the board. That's the purpose of doing it. It's not influencing, we would never do that, but updating the board on what is exactly going on so that he can make his point, he or she can make their points before the strategic plan process starts. So it'll be a very different dynamic this year, and we're excited about their growth. The last one I'm going to talk about is build buy-in and consensus for the board staff team. One of the things you're going to hear this off and on during this training program, it is so important that every person in the room is heard, feels heard, and respected. When they walk out at the end of the time, there should not be one person who feels like they weren't a part of the process, or if they said something that it wasn't taken seriously. So we will be talking about this more in the coming minutes, but it's a big goal and it's an important one.
I felt like I could spit fire when I knew that somebody was in my corner. And I think MDI played a very good role, because me, just candidly, as a younger leader, having to lead up with folks who are like 20, 30 years my senior, it's intimidating. And to know that like MDI and I sort of informally but formally kind of had a game plan of, this is generally what this time's going to look like. I feel like I probably never had a stronger voice.
Another goal is assess whether there will be any anticipated tensions, either with ideas or with personalities, before the strategic planning process begins. This is really important to know. Are there any sacred cows? Are there any biases? Are there any historical scars or anything else like that that really needs to be discovered before you start the strategic planning process? That can be done with one-on-one meetings prior to the time, or sometimes it even works out that those things come out during the listening time as you spend time with the Lord and hearts are convicted. So it's just one of those things that's really important. And just as we know in our Christian faith that we should make things right with our brother or sister before we take communion, that same principle is really true with the strategic planning process, that we need to go to our brother or sister and get everything clear before we start into something like that. The next one is activate the board towards action. So many times the board is inactive or not energized because they really are not clear on what their direction is or what their responsibilities are. And so you want to invite the board into partnership in this whole process. You want to make sure the chairman of the board is really comfortable and is not caught off guard by anything that's going to happen during the process. And so you want to carry him into the action. You want to create momentum for the staff and board team that will excite them and re-energize them as they begin to implement the plan. And you want to be mindful of the staff in the strategic planning process. The staff always deals with the day-to-day operations. They understand what it's going to take to implement a strategic plan. It's vital that they have a voice, especially in the action planning process, which we will talk about in a little bit. But right now, I'd like to introduce you to Chris Barnhill, who's the Executive Director of Franktown Open Hearts, and he's going to share some things with you.
I'd taken on this role as Executive Director of this nonprofit who had come through some transitions, some turmoil, and I walked into a little bit of a hornet's nest. Again, a lot of these tasks I had to do, but a lot of them I needed to delegate. We had a very good board, well-intentioned board, and to a point, an enthusiastic board, but they did not know how to board. Having some outside consultants work with us, the MDI consultants coming in and working with us in our board retreat, they are able to, from an outside perspective, third-party perspective, call a spade. If things needed to be done, they were able to identify that and be able to look at the different board members and say, now who's going to take ownership of this? And it's not going to be the executive director, it's going to be one of you. Now which of you are going to take ownership? And wait for them to commit, and I will take that one. If some tasks are being dropped or some assignments were not being followed through with, they can, from an outside perspective, without fear of retribution or being fired or what have you, say, you guys aren't doing your job. You guys need to step up. This is a board deal, not a staff deal. Y'all need to take ownership. Y'all need to do this. And it was very, very helpful because I knew what I needed the board to do, but I needed the board to take ownership of that. They need to hear very strong messages about what they're doing well and what they're not doing so well, and that message needed to come from somebody other than me. They're my boss. And so they were able to get that done. The board's response has been tremendous. They jumped in, they took assignments, they took a lot of that pressure off of me. It became more of a cohesive team. It became more camaraderie versus who's at fault, who's to blame. Rather, let's all pull together, let's fix this, and let's make it better. And we owe a great deal of thanks to MDI for that. we're where we are today in large part because of the services provided by MDI.
How do you know a planning session is needed? You start by looking at the presenting issues. Do you see a lack of focus, unity, and direction within the ministry? Has your leader mentioned feeling overwhelmed or pulled in too many directions? They're under-resourced or unsure of how to move forward. Is there cohesion of purpose in the ministry's programs, or are some of the programs disconnected? Do the resources and priorities of the day-to-day operations line up with achieving the stated mission of the organization? Do they have stated goals and have a direction that they hope for in the next 3 to 5 years? Pondering these questions can give you some clues to when to start a strategic planning process and when it will help bring clarity and renewed energy to a ministry team.
Now are some of the things that mentors must have in order to really make this a successful time. So we're looking at the first point, which is trust. Trust must be solidified between leader and the MDI team. One of the things we've already talked about working with the leader ahead of time. One of the things I think is really important is that the MDI mentor needs to work the room in a social way so that people can learn and see that you're not some hotshot from Nashville that is unrelated to what it is that they're doing, that you actually are real people with a real caring for what you're doing. And so whether it's the social time before it starts, coffee breaks, lunch, work the room. Let them feel you. Let them feel comfortable to be around you. The next point is super important. So another factor to consider is ensuring that you have buy-in to the planning process from all key stakeholders. This should include leader, client, board chair, founder, donor, staff member. If you can imagine, let's say that our leader client is the executive director, not the chairman of the board. And here we are coming in, maybe not have spent much time with the chairman, and he is sitting there wondering, where is this going? Am I going to lose control? How do they even know what it is that we need or where we're going to go? He's going to feel very insecure, and it is so important that we connect with this person or the non-client person, the chief person, which in this case is the board chair, ahead of time. Now we can see him for coffee ahead of time. We can talk to him if he's out of town by video. But whenever we do, we sit down with him, we listen well, we let him know that we are on his side and that we are planning on helping him in any way that we can during the process, so that he feels like we know in our hearts what his desires and wishes are for the time of the strategic planning time or the ministry in general. Founders, big problem. A lot of times founders aren't even connected to the ministry anymore, but if they stand up, if they're in the room and they stand up and they take a strong stand, they will be heard. And so if the founder is going to be there, you might want to touch base with them too and just ask them, just be friendly and ask them what they think is going on in the ministry, what their interests are, and where they think it's, just casually talking to them, but let them feel like you're caring before the process starts about what they feel. In the same way, like a major donor's there. Well, a major donor needs to be paid attention to. And so we can't just let them sit back and feel like they're not a part of the process or that we don't care enough about them to talk about ahead of time. So this is this stakeholder thing can really contribute big time to the success of the whole process. If you don't do your homework here, you could easily get into traps in places where board chair just raises up, say, this doesn't make any sense, I don't like where this is going, or whatever it is that he or she has to say. The next point is mission, vision, and values. If the ministry does not have mission, vision, and values already put together, then you need to do that ahead of time, because it's a long process and it's an important process. And so you tell the people who have asked you to do the retreat, can you please put these things together prior to us doing the retreat? And the last point that I'm going to cover is the leader-client understanding why it would be greatly benefit to the organization to have a strategic plan. Good point. When you start, when I say you, I'm talking about MDI mentors. When you start out, you need to tell them what it is that's going to happen. What is the flow of what we're going to be doing during the process, and what are we going to be walking away with? People need to know the confines and the arena of what we're going to do prior to it starting out. At some points, people can get impatient and wondering where this is all going and why are we spending so much time on this? But if you do a good job explaining it at the beginning, and so that they can see the sequencing and see how it's going to work and what we're going to walk out of the room with, then they'll give you grace.
Before we unpack MDI's strategic planning process, there are some key terms that need to be defined that have a variety of meanings in our culture. At MDI, we know that we wanted to have unity in our communications, and so we spent a lot of time deliberating and praying about how we wanted to define these terms so that we would all be on the same page. And so we have determined the following definitions for these terms that will be used throughout the planning process. And we ask you, as MDI mentors and consultants, to use the terms in these ways. Vision. MDI describes the vision statement as a ministry North Star. It is a constant focal point for the future. The vision statement should be aspirational and motivate the organization to reach beyond. It should describe the inspirational, desired change resulting from the ministry's work fulfilled to its fullest potential. Vision statements are focused on the future realization of the ministry's impact in a perfect world. So a good question to ask is, if the ministry were able to serve every person to the fullest impact of the stated mission, what would the end result be? Some examples of some good vision statements, I have to say the first one is Ministry Leaders Thriving from MDI, A Hunger-Free America from Feeding America, No Human Owning the Heartbreaking Story of Human Trafficking, which is Freedom's Promise. Mission. The mission statement defines why a ministry exists, its reason for being, and what the ministry does. That why question is essential. The mission statement should be representative, describing the mission's purpose and activity in broad brushstrokes. It should be concise, clear, and easily memorized by all major stakeholders. Some examples of mission statements are healing the sick and proclaiming the kingdom of God, Cure International Hospitals. Empowering vulnerable, abandoned women and children in Christ-centered programs that teach sustainability and family preservation for Heal Ministries, which is one of our clients. All of these are from our clients. Connecting people to the needs of orphans and widows around the globe from 127 worldwide. Core values. MDI defines core values as the guardrails that guide a ministry's decision making in pursuit of their mission and vision. Core values should answer the question of What do we value? And what principles will guide our actions? Some examples are African-led ideas and processes of change is a core value that African leadership uses. Culturally relevant and doctrinally pure is Willow Creek Church. We value family, God's love through generation from Amazima Ministries. Roadmap goal. This typically comes after you have gone through the strategic planning process. The roadmap is a unifying statement that sets the ministry's sights on its current primary ambition. The roadmap goal identifies big, high-level turning points that strategically advance a ministry towards its vision. We use the term goal to describe a 1 to 5 year quantifiable and achievable strategic focus. To have a clearly defined and smooth strategy in place by our founders' requested exit date is an example of a roadmap goal. To have our funding and facilities match the pace of our growth in 3 years is another. To prevent burnout in our top leadership by holistically reviewing our program expectations, distribution of resources, and creating a staff care strategy. We're going to go through in a little while the process for getting these roadmap goals, but we want you to understand that they're an important part of it. Tagline is a very succinct, memorable, dramatic phrase that sums up the tone and premise of the ministry. Taglines are typically designed for public promotional purposes. They should be thought-provoking and serve the purpose of piquing the interest of potential ministry partners. And some examples: lead men worth following, equipping leaders for stronger communities, a safe place for tough choices, serving hope one meal at a time. And one I've heard this week from Mercy Multiplied is restoring hope and transforming lives. These are all taglines that go along with the name of an organization. An elevator speech is a term used to describe the brief outline of who the ministry is, what the ministry does, and the impact of their work. The term elevator speech comes from a speech that can be delivered in a very short time, like an elevator ride that's 20 to 60 seconds long. It's a very important tool that all key stakeholders need to be trained and equipped on how to use this elevator speech so they can be a spokesman for the organization. Again, we realize that you all, as mentors, consultants, come from a variety of backgrounds and very diverse experiences, and have used these terms in all different ways in your professional lives and in lots of different ways. At MDI, in mentoring and consulting, we are constantly and continually refining our ministry and our training and learning. And we want to learn from the incredible brain trust of you as our mentor consultants. So please share your experiences with us as we continue to refine our planning process.
Well, today we're here with Troy Waugh, and he is one of MDI's senior mentors, and we are thrilled to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Heather. I am delighted to be here, and we're going to talk about what strategic planning today. Is that our subject?
That's our topic.
Good.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, some of you may not know that Troy actually developed a tool for MDI that has to do with strategic planning. And Troy, could you tell us a little bit about where that tool came from and what spurred you on to create it?
Sure, Heather. I've worked with businesses in strategic planning for many years, and in early years we developed a plan and for corporations or businesses, and sometimes that plan would be 15 or 20 or 30 pages long. And you would come back the next month or the next time period to meet with people, and sometimes they'd have trouble finding it. It was not only in the drawer, but it was buried in the drawer somewhere. And so over time, I found that the shorter the plan, the more accessible it became and the more usable it was. I happened to be watching a football game one afternoon, and I noticed that the coaches carried around a game plan that was laminated and was color coded on either side, and it looked like to me that the coaches had a good idea. They shortened it down. Their plan for the day was shortened down to just 2 pages. Now, it was obvious the head coach had a different plan than the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator. So while the plans all worked together, they were probably all different plans. Over time, just for trial and error, we summarized it down to 2 pages. A page up front and one on the back, so that an organization, a CEO, a director, someone who is head of an organization can use this with their board, can use it with their executive team, to make sure that the vision, mission, values, and priorities always stay in front of the team at all times.
It's very common for organizations to bring in outside consultants and do strategic planning. And the product that the consultants give them is usually a very big packet of information that takes them quite a bit of time to create and then gets distributed, and the reputation is in most places that it is something that gathers dust over a period of time. Thanks to our senior mentor, Troy Waugh, we have created a tool that condenses everything down into 3 pages, and it is very simple to read, and it doesn't take long at all to read. And so this tool is one of the big advantages that we have to over other organizations, other than yours and my intelligent level, of course, that goes without saying. So let's take a look at the blank form of what this roadmap looks like. It starts up here with vision, mission, and values. And remember, we're going to have this done ahead of time, so this will be filled out at the beginning of your process. And then we go through and try through a process, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes. We will come up with the top 3, 4, or 5 objectives that we have for this organization for the coming year or maybe 2 years. So we'll explain how we get that in a minute. Then, once we have those, then the next page, we write down what each of those objectives were that were on the first page, and we start by doing action items for each one so that we walk out with actual things that need to be done and what the procedure and process is. Marty will be talking about that in a few minutes in detail. And then there's page 3. Trust me, it doesn't look like much, but it's magic. And what you're going to find out is that all the ideas that were presented during the brainstorming session that didn't make the top 1 to 5 in the first page that we had the objectives, they all get dumped onto here. And so everybody's ideas, nobody's ideas are thrown away. They're all preserved. Everything is good. People see that what their ideas and what they care about still is there, and it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. So just to go over the flow one more time. We have mission vision, which is the broadest view of the ministry. We have the roadmap goal, which Marty talked about before, which is a summary of the objectives that have been picked out. So we have, and then the next are the objectives that the whole team picked out, which we'll be talking about later. So it's from broad, narrowing it down, 3 to 5 objectives, and then action plan, and then the parking lot. It's a great tool, and it's very complete.
We have said that there's many ways to lead MDI's strategic planning retreat, and each one of them is tailored to your individual leader client. But we want to equip you with some tools and key components that will work across any circumstance and any type of retreat. And so the basic core parts of it, of the process, are listening, visioning exercises, the creation or review or an update of the mission, vision, and values, the focus and priorities exercise that Steve just talked about, and then action planning. So how do we open all of this? Like you do every other time you meet with your leader client. You start off with necessary introductions so everyone knows who everyone is around the circle, announcements, and always give an outline of the agenda so everyone knows, as Steve mentioned this earlier, where this time is going. You're setting the tone for the whole time by keeping your eyes on the Lord for His leadership and His direction during this time. And that's why we always start out with prayer. You are inviting God's presence into this meeting. You're asking Him to speak and to have Him share His wisdom with you. So we lead every strategic planning time just as we lead every meeting with our leader clients in a posture of prayer. And we really hope that the leadership team that we're meeting with and that they will follow that lead, and they will start listening for God's voice, because that is a powerful gift that we can give every leader that we work with. As we start the listening time, you can these exercises are meant to enter a focused time to hear from the Lord and to give the Holy Spirit space to speak to the future that God has for this ministry. We want this whole strategic planning process to be His time, to be His plan, to be His way. In MDI's past experience, we have found these prayer times to be highly effective. They help transition a group from thinking about their day-to-day activities and what's going on in their personal lives, and really help them focus in on a time to hear from the Lord. We encourage you and want you to lead these times in your own strengths and in your own ways of doing them. But we're going to give you some suggestions that you can do along with your co-mentor. Just remember that your shared time for this season during the planning process is a time to give the Holy Spirit space so God can share His ideas about the future of this ministry. A listening prayer time is designed to give the group a prayer guide. And so we will give you some suggestions and do that. And then we'll ask everyone who's sitting around the table to find a quiet place to pray individually and to sit for a time to hear and seek God's voice. You know what? This can even be done right in the seats in the room as they sit around a conference table, if you have a limited amount of time and don't want to scatter. Or if you have a longer period of time, you can go out and find a private place in the building or even go outside. You're going to make it work for whatever the circumstances you're leading the strategic planning retreat in. You know, I don't know if you've all done this before, but this isn't a complicated process. You may have heard the story of Susanna Wesley, who had 19 children, and she always wanted to spend time with the Lord. She had a very unique way of finding her quiet place. She would sit down in her kitchen, pull her apron over her head, and tell her children not to bother her. And they knew that their mother was in quiet time and was listening to the God, and they were not to disturb her. Martin Luther said, you know what? Prayer is just like breathing. So we don't need to overcomplicate it. Prayer is simply talking and listening to God, which means that the key to prayer is simply praying. It is our gift from our Heavenly Father. So we want to take time in the midst of this day of planning and thinking and writing things down to allow the prompting of the Holy Spirit and stop. We are asking God for His power to work in our lives. And while our aprons might not be a physical piece of fabric, we can sit right here and throw Susanna's apron over our heads just like she did and come to the Lord. To start it off, we recommend that you ask the Lord for a Bible verse or a passage that He wants the group to meditate on. Sometimes the leader that you're working with may have a specific verse that they want the team to center in on. If you want to, you can create scenarios that describe people involved or end users, and you can imagine these and be creative in how you put these together. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the planning team centered in on the ministry. The whole point of this time is to get a fresh glimpse of why this team is doing what they're doing and sets the stage to receive a fresh perspective from the Lord. So you're getting the planning team spiritually and emotionally prepared. You can print out a prayer guide instructions on a handout and allow space for each person to journal, or they can bring a journal or have a tablet that they're taking notes. It really doesn't matter. We have a lot of examples that are all going to be a part of your packet that you receive that you can go through that also have examples of developing scenarios and creative ways that you can get this time started. One of the things you want to encourage the group that this is about listening and not about talking. And you can acknowledge that silence can be scary for some people, but not encourage them not to feel tempted to fill the silence with their own words or start to pray for things for the ministry. They're asking God to talk, and then they're receiving and listening. So as you write out instructions for your group, suggest that they ask the Lord for what He is saying to them. Strongly urge them, don't edit anything. Write down everything. They can go through it later, but this is not the time for editing. Write down whatever comes to their heart, their mind, their spirit. Now this can be in the form of an idea, a picture, a series of words, scripture, a sense or a feeling. And if they find their minds racing and they're going off onto things that are what they have to do when they get home, they can invite Jesus into those thoughts to calm the storm, to bring it to light what He has for them. And if they continue to struggle with all sorts of different things, all they have to do is ask Jesus, why am I struggling with this? And then rest in a still, alert, and believing posture. So we're going to give some prayer guide samples. And here's just some suggestions. Start out, God, here's your ministry. We want it to be all about you. So reflecting on the past years and looking ahead to the next 10 years, God, who have you uniquely equipped our ministry to be? And what unique gifts, talents, passions, and interests have you given me that I can use for this ministry? Lord, are there next steps for the ministry? And if so, what are they? And if something's not going well, God, what should we do? And then, is there something I need to own or confess before you, God, or someone else, before I move into the planning process? This ends up being a real critical point to have on the prayer list. Then you can release the group for whatever time you feel is right and give them a finite time to return to the group or to look up from their seats. It could be 15 or 30 minutes if you're limited on time, or 1 to 2 hours if you have a multi-day retreat. We at MDI consider this a very high priority, and it can change the whole planning process. So prioritize this time accordingly and give it as much time as you can. We really encourage you to spend at least 30 to 45 minutes in prayer if you can possibly do that. So when you gather everyone back together, ask your group if they would like to share what they've heard. Not everyone will want to share. Some of us, people are quiet about wanting to talk about what they heard, and some of it was such holy ground they're not quite ready to share it. But encourage them. And in the meantime, you and your co-mentor have also joined in the prayer time and have gone through the same process as everyone else on the team. And so you can even start the time listing some of the things that you heard and encourage the group to join you in putting their things. We suggest one of the mentors acts as a scribe and the other one acts as a facilitator and asks the questions, kind of leads the group, while the scribe is writing down everything that the people sitting around the table are hearing. Some people may hear words, thoughts. They may want to play music they heard. Some may envision images or experiences. Others may have scripture that they heard in response. We have found that when we give room for the Spirit to speak, He speaks in many different ways to each of the different individuals. But there's always a common thread tying all the responses back to Him. So as mentors and consultants facilitating the conversation, your job is to find that common thread or find that pattern and give it the attention that God needs. So as you're listing things up on the board, when you start seeing some commonalities, circle those things. And what you will do then is as you identify those responses, you'll use those responses and those common threads or patterns as the foundation for your whole strategic planning time. And you will leave those up on the board. And so they can keep going back to those and seeing with what they're talking about really matches up with what God gave them in their listening time. There has been such incredible impact at MDI with these listening times. And so recently, a mentoring team facilitated a listening time for a ministry that has been focusing on feeding a program for the homeless. In the listening time for that planning retreat, the leadership kept resonating with the verse, "Do you want to be made well?" Through this, they discovered that the Lord was transitioning the ministry to focus on holistic rehabilitation and life skills to take people from homelessness to hopefulness. This was a huge shift for this ministry, and it was all made possible because the MDI mentors consultants gave space for the Holy Spirit to speak. We have had huge breakthroughs in relationships, in priorities, and many tears from these listening times. We also do visioning times sometimes, and Troy Waugh is going to share now about how to do a visioning exercise.
Also, I've been with you a few times when you've done a visioning exercise with a group, whether it's a board group or a staff group, where you actually have everyone in the room close their eyes. Could you talk to us a bit about why you do that and how it works?
Again, I think after a period of maybe as long as 30 to 45 minutes or even an hour of preliminary priority setting, then I like to do some final priority setting to really get at the head and the heart working together. And that's what this visioning exercise does. And so sometimes I ask people in the room, close your eyes. I want you to relax. Put your pens down, your pencils. Don't have anything that would interfere with you just being silent and being in a good place. And then I slow my voice down. I try to be more soft. We've been doing some priority setting already, so people are in that mode. So then I say, once you've closed your eyes, I want you to imagine with me that you're in a place in nature in which you're comfortable, whether that be a mountaintop, whether that be a stream or an ocean front, a place in nature, and I want you to sit down there. And so I take this very slow. I'll speed it up for the video, but I want people to really get in the mood of being quiet, envisioning, and most of all to listen to what their soul is telling them at this point. So the first thing I ask them to do is look down the path in your imagination and have someone coming up the path who is your spouse or your brother or your sister or your father or your mother, a relative, a close relative, and that person walks up to you. And I usually take quite a few seconds to let that person physically walk up in the imagination of everyone. And then this person, whomever I'm imagining it to be, tells me, this is what your ministry and your commitment to this ministry has done for me. This is what it's meant to my life. So after 30 seconds, I just let the person listen. I stop, I'm very quiet. I let that listening happen. Could last up to a minute. For most people, a minute of silence is a long time. But as people get comfortable with it, I can extend that minute to a minute and a half or 2 minutes as I move on. So after I've done the first person, I will typically ask a second person, maybe a constituent of the ministry, a person who's benefited. Whether that be a family, a child, someone who has a great story to tell as a result of the ministry helping this person through a difficult time in their particular lives. Again, I'll ask that person to walk up. I'll take it very slowly. This time I may take another 15 to 30 seconds of silence than I did for the first person. I've often found that there will be some emotion at this point. Some people will express it during the session, and that's okay. Just be prepared for it, ready for it, and be ready to receive it. So after we've had two individuals come up and tell what the ministry has meant to him or her, then I have a third person. And that third person is almost always Jesus. That person would walk up the lane very slowly, stop in front of the ministry leader or the board member, and then I would say, now Jesus is going to tell you what your ministry has meant to his kingdom and to the people that you served. And I just want you to listen. So on this third one, I typically, again, will extend the time of listening another 15 to 30 seconds. So it may extend as many as 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, as people listen to that. So once this has happened and Jesus has returned down the lane, then I get people to write down what you could see our ministry doing, what you feel like our ministry should be about. What's our purpose? Where should we be going? And once I've given people to sort of debrief that for 5 minutes on paper, then we take a break. Because this has been a pretty intense exercise. Could have lasted an hour and a half as much as an hour and a half up until this point. So I think at this point people would need a break.
Typically, the group is really energized after hearing from the Lord about the future. You want to build off of this now. Did the theme from the listening time reveal any new dimensions of the existing vision, mission, and values? Use these thoughts to review, revisit or reflect on the existing vision, mission, and values. And if there needs to be some changes, now's the time to start talking about those. But do it in a conceptual way. This isn't a time to wordsmith. You can review the purpose, and here are some tools that can help with that. You want to reinforce why statements are important, the purpose of them, and the role that they play in the whole strategic planning process. Is the ministry still headed in the same direction? Is the mission statement still relative? Has a new core value been identified? All of these tie into a tool that Troy Wall is now going to explain. That's a vision, mission, values graph.
The mission is God's purpose for this ministry. And so to try to get that down, that purpose was true the day God gave it to us. It's true today, and it'll be true tomorrow. It's always true. The mission, the purpose, what we're about is always true. So I like to think of the mission as permeating the entire organization. This is what we're about. The vision is not true today. And I think a lot of people get mission and vision confused, because mission is what we're about, vision is where I'm going. If I'm going to take a trip to Germany, that's my vision. That's where I want to be. I will ultimately get there. If I'm going to California, if I'm going to have a board meeting tomorrow, my vision is to have that board meeting tomorrow. The board meeting is not true today. It's only true when I have achieved it. And then, of course, what are my values? Values are sort of the guardrails. So the graph that I like to use with this is that mission is true today, it's true tomorrow. Values are the guardrails that say we will not go outside these values. And I'll explain that in a moment. Vision is only true tomorrow. It's not true today. It's only true when we get there. Values are really important for us to define what values are. It's always interesting to me to see a politician say, well, I have values. And I giggle at that because Hitler had values. Everybody has values. Values are self-selected values. And so it's important for the organization to decide what are our values. Many organizations will select a value like integrity. Okay, well, what does integrity mean? Integrity means that my words and my actions integrate with each other. So if I have someone who is always late, never on time, always making excuses, I can say our value is integrity. That means our words and our actions integrate. And this is where we're having trouble. If that's always the case, you can see someone has gone outside our values. And so every value that we have, whether it be integrity, serving the Lord, being gentle, whatever that value is, needs an explanation of what it means. Now, mission, we need to have a mission so that everyone in the organization can say it, knows what it is, knows what it means. If we can say it, that means it needs to be short and memorable. And the shorter the better. The fewer words, the better. If you look at some of the elements that some of the examples that we've given people, we have a list of the 50 most impactful mission statements of nonprofit organizations we can supply you. And it helps you get 400 words down to 30 or 20 or even 10 sometimes. And some of the most impactful mission statements are 2 or 3 or 4 words, if we possibly can.
Thanks, Troy, for sharing about that. We also have a PowerPoint template that goes through the whole strategic planning process and adds to this. And Heather is going to share about that at the end of the program.
This is the time when we do brainstorming for the strategic objectives. So we're going to tell the board and anybody that's attending, including the MDI mentors, that we are going to list anything that anybody has as an idea of what the ministry should be doing in the next few years, or priorities that are not correct and should be rethought out. Anything that they think should be done, this is the time for everyone in the room to give their suggestions. So to begin the process, an MDI mentor needs to go up to, if you're using giant Post-it notes or a flip chart, page, whatever it is that you're using, you need to go up and start writing down everything that's said. If something even gets giggles because it's so dumb, it doesn't matter. It goes on the list. So you're going to create a lot of pages, maybe up to 3 pages or more of all these different ideas, and you're going to post them on the wall, whether you're sticking them up there or using the Post-it note, whatever it is. You're going to have them lined up on the wall so everybody can see all of them all the time. Then the process is to look at those, let's say there are 3 pages, that we look at the 3 pages and we try to combine them the best that we can. So many times people will give a suggestion that's a sub-issue to a broader suggestion. So you erase all the sub stuff because you have it captured under the umbrella thing. But you need to try to pull these Post-it note lists down to 1, if at all possible. It really needs to try to get it down so it's manageable. I have as an example today, this is a made-up list that I did just for example, but I'm just going to read. This is what we ended up with after we combined all the different sheets. So there were 3 in this exercise. Let's say that there were 3 full sheets that are up on the wall, and we've come up down to this list. And I'm just going to read it quickly so that you see what's on here. Develop women's ministry and village, develop non-academic curriculum, build home for American director. This is a Ugandan ministry, by the way. Train staff better to help troubled children, hire a development director, work with elders at the local church to make them more theological sound for children, build a soccer field, that actually should say football, improve health clinic, improve team building for staff, hire MDI for $1 million. Now, I wonder where that came from. I mean, a guy has to try anything that he can try. I know Chris Stowers will be very happy to see me include that. So hire MDI for $1 million. Why not? So start the process to rebuild the U.S. board, strengthen Uganda board, rethink children's residential program, and build a secondary school. So we step back, and now comes the process of having everybody to have a say in exactly what it is that, how we're going to take this list and turn it into something that is meaningful and create priorities of these different ideas. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass out markers or pencils that are different colors. So hopefully everybody's going to have a different color, and MDI will have the same color. If there are 3 MDI people or 2 MDI people, you use the same color. So when people look up here at after the voting is finished, they can see where MDI is. So let's go to the next thing. There are 2 methods of voting. We have MDI mentors that are doing both, and they both like their own method. So I'm saying to you that these are equal methods. You can do either one you want, but there's one group of people who like the idea of having check marks. So since we have a pretty good sized list here, we're going to give them 5 votes, 5 check marks. And on the check mark system, you can load those up if you want. I'm just quickly looking here. But here's somebody who put 2 check marks, 3 people who put 2 check marks of the same color on here. So they spent 2 of their votes, of their 5 votes, on this. So they can put all 5 of their votes, if they want, on a line. So that is one way of doing voting. So the second option is to use numbers. And here is a page where we can see numbers, the numbers that have been voted on or being used. Now everybody has a different color pencil or pen. So even though this example is not that way, that would be the way it is. Now when the key people that I'm interested in, which is the leader client and the chairman of the board and anybody else that I think is super important, I'm going to watch and see what their color is, and I'm going to watch their votes. And so here, that's the reason these numbers are in red, because it shows where the people voted that I'm interested in. So the MDI mentors should vote last. Everybody's voted. MDI mentors get up, and they're looking at this from a strategic standpoint. And we look at it separately, this is not a collusion thing. But if I were to vote normally, I would pick, this reason this asterisk is here is because that's the most important thing on the board for me, personally, knowing what I know about the ministry. But I see that it's already gotten 24 votes, so it doesn't need me to vote for it. So I put my 5, my first vote, because remember, we're doing 5, the number 5 for our first vote, 4 for our second vote, 3 for our third, and 2 and 1. So I put my heaviest vote on the development director, because I know that they are not going to be able to get these issues paid for and built unless they have a professional on their staff raising funds. So I'm trying to send a signal that this, and hopefully my vote of a 5 will send this into being voted as one of the final 5. And in fact, that's what happened here, is that it ended up being the number 5 issue because I put my full vote weight on it. So, and then I'm not going to go through about why I voted the way I did, but there are reasons why I picked each one of these numbers based on what I know and what I'm seeing my leaders and my key people voting for. So, this is how it ends up. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We have 5 things that are going to get shifted down to the strategic objectives. And so if you'll remember when we looked at the sheet, that bottom section on the front page of the roadmap, that's where these 5 objectives are going to go. So then I put down these asterisks ahead of time because I know from talking to the chairman and the leader and our leader client that these asterisk issues are already underway. And so I didn't need to vote for them either because they're already being done. So again, I may have voted for some of these, but I didn't because I knew that it wasn't going to make any difference. So now presumably our task is finished. However, there is another way to look at this because we have 3 entities in this ministry that need something to do or something to focus on or to look into the future for. We have the board of directors, we have the staff, and we have the on-site ministry in Uganda. So we need to make sure that these 5 are a representative of include all of those 3 entities, and the fact is that they don't. So what I might do is an option. This is an option because you're finished with the brainstorming at this stage. We've done our job. But we may want to say, you know what? The board doesn't have things to do on this list, and we need to give them some priorities. So let's go not only on this list, but if there are other ideas on the other sheets that have to do with the board of directors, we may want to bring those back up and say, let's just quickly vote for the board issues so that the board has some things to do, not just the staff or the development director, raising the funds for these other issues that were voted on that were financial. So in this particular screen, I've broken down the financial issues and the operational issues. And so, again, I could have done this is to push this aside because this is going to be decided down the road because the development director needs to come in and get the ministry in shape. I could have split these two lists, one for the board and one for the staff. These are optional things that you can do if you feel like what's been decided isn't really rounded and complete for the issues that will engage the entire ministry.
They sat down with me and helped me prioritize. They helped me identify all the things that needed to be done, and we probably sat down and looked at 14, 16, 18, however many there were, very important to-dos that needed to be done. And they needed to be done right, and they needed to be done right away. But there was one of me, and you can't do it all at once. So they helped me prioritize, look at the tasks that need to be done, know what's absolutely the most crucial, what things are going to get done, but they don't necessarily need to be done immediately, and gave me back my sanity. So we started whittling those down one after the other, being able to, like I said, being able to prioritize. And looking back now, 3 years later, gives you a lot of, retrospective look at that. And looking back, all those tasks were on those sheets that had to be done, all those to-dos, they've all been done. I've earned a few gray hairs in the interim, but for the most part, they were able to be accomplished in a concise, meaningful way without me jumping off the ledge.
One of the things we didn't talk about in filling all of this out is the roadmap goal. Now Marty's going to tell us how that fits in.
Is there a shared goal tying all these things together? What is the ministry ultimately trying to achieve in pursuing these strategic objectives? How do we capture this motivation? That's where the roadmap goal comes in. The roadmap goal is a unifying target statement that is quantifiable and a stretch to achieve. You can prompt coming up with this by asking questions like, what are the biggest goals you see for the ministry right now? Or why are we doing this? It helps keep the focus on the strategic areas instead of getting lost in the day-to-day of what we have to do. Some examples of roadmap goals are, in 3 years, we will have the funding, staffing, and planning in place to acquire a permanent facility for this ministry. Or, in 2 years, we will have a reignited ministry with an active board, an expanding donor base, a staff care plan, and double our number of people served. What you do for the strategic goals is you look at them as a whole and you put together the summary goal as the roadmap goal. And that is what it's a tool. So when you look at your strategic plan after it's all finished, that is a clarifying statement for the whole thing after your vision, mission, and values. Now we go into action planning, and this is kind of really the nuts and bolts of the strategic plan. The strategic objectives, which Steve went through, are the foundation of the action plan. Now your goal is to get the team to take these ideas from concepts to concrete steps. So you ask questions like, what would it take to accomplish this strategic objective? When do we need to have this done? Or who is responsible for this type of task? Those are so important. You can do this through a PowerPoint or a flip chart or a giant post-it note for each objective, or you can develop pre-printed forms like this and hand them out. You can also divide your planning team up into small groups and give each group a strategic objective, if it's a large enough group. And they each take one and they make their list of all the different things that need to get done under that strategic objective. Either way is great. You just want to know that you want to bring everyone back together to decide on who is responsible and when they're done. That is not done in separate groups. It's also very important, like we have down here as the last point, that the board has an action plan in addition to the staff's. They may be all this the same roadmap goal, everything's the same, but the board will have some board action points that fall under the strategic objectives, while the staff has some different action points. The board then can review their action points at each one of the board meetings, and the staff can keep up on what they're needed to do to implement the plan at like their weekly staff meetings. All this goes broken down step by step as you're putting together a master plan for the ministry.
So Troy, now that you've been with MDI for several years and have worked with multiple ministry leaders through our organization, you've gotten the opportunity to use this specific strategic planning tool with a lot of different ministries, big and small, very streamlined or a little bit not so streamlined. What are some of the benefits that you've seen out of using this specific tool with those leaders? What have been some of the benefits for the leaders, for the teams, for their ministries?
I think one of the biggest benefits that I've found so far is that, quite frankly, many ministry leaders have not written down for themselves or for others God's purpose in their lives and in their ministry. And they've prayed about it. They've gotten this mission from God. He said, go do this. And they've charged off and done it. One of the benefits of having this plan is that through prayer and through listening, we actually capture it on paper in words so that not only the ministry leader has it in focus, but all the board members have it in focus. It's so effective when you not only have the leader able to articulate the mission, the purpose, the vision, where they're going with the organization, but it's important to have board members also able to articulate it, and the way to do that is to have it wordsmithed down. The only way to get it is through continual praying and refining and listening to God and getting it down on paper. That way, every morning when I wake up or when I come into my office or when I start working, I look at that and realize that's my purpose.
Now we're at the end of the whole process, and people have gone home, and the only people left are the MDI team and maybe a couple of the key people. But this is the time that you sit down and, first of all, just thank God for what has happened, because we've been a part of a lot of these things, and it has just been an amazing experience. And so let's never forget to thank the Lord, as well as to do the listening and the praying before and asking and all that sort of thing. So this is the time to really go before the Lord in a personal way and thank Him for guiding you through, and to the confidence you felt, and the just the way the whole process worked. Then you need to fill out the 3 pages that we've talked about. You remember that you start with the mission vision, the 3-page roadmap form now needs to be filled out through all the different notes that you have. And so that will be, it's very succinct and you've seen it, so I don't need to explain it again. But this is the time when you fill it out while it's still fresh in your head, what's happened. Then you need to take that, and you have an option of taking other notes. These are very short. When you put down action notes and you put down the strategic objectives, they're very short, and they should be short. But you may have additional notes that you would like to share as well. And there is an optional, we have an extended roadmap form that you can use, and that will allow you to send them additional information that they may want to have. Then your job is to write a huge motivational email to the stakeholders, whoever you're sending this to, the chairman of the board, certainly your leader, and say, this is our findings, and tell them what you really feel about their ministry. You've seen the inside of it. You've seen their heart. You felt what they are feeling. And it's very good if you will express that back to them and say what, and Honor, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I want you to say what's honest in your heart. Express that. Don't just say it amongst yourself, wow, that was great, blah, 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 what a great ministry. No, you need to communicate that to the people who sat for a day and a half listening to you lead them through this process. So between the roadmap and the email and perhaps the extended roadmap form, that is the end of the process. And it's an exciting time. And I can't wait for each of you to have the chance to do this for yourself and to feel the elation and the presence of God that the rest of us have felt over the years.
We always want to equip our team at MDI with the best resources that we have available. So I just wanted to remind you that we have this great meeting space available. If you have teams that you want a space to meet in, you can always reserve this room. We have other rooms here as well. So if you want to reserve the room, just email mdi@mdimentors.org to make a reservation. The room also has this wonderful television in it with a big camera that is not currently attached but will be. So if you have any international clients that you want to have them in the room present for your retreats life size, that's also an option here. We have a lot of other tools for you, including minor things like remote controls when you're doing PowerPoints, or we have flip charts, we have easels, we have carrying bags for those things, we have multiple colored markers. So if you want to just have a pack ready to go, you can let our office know and we can prep that for you. In addition to any things that you need printed for your retreat, if you email those to us with enough advance notice, we can have copies of those made for you as well. So back to the resources that we have as far as templates go. You have seen this many times in this tutorial, but this is our template for the roadmap. So again, it has 3 pieces, and you'll be able to have copies of this that you can click on and type on to be able to update it and tailor it specifically for your leader client. Also, Steve had mentioned that in addition to this, there are the strategic objectives on here, which you can do summary statements of what your objectives are. But sometimes as a mentor, when you've gone through all of this in-depth planning process and you've heard just great, incredible things from that listening time, you want to have a place to be able to remind some of the strength of those things that were heard. And that's what this piece is for. So this, it's called the expanded roadmap, is a place where you can enter some of the big statements that were said if they are not already captured on here. And you also have space on here that if you wanted to go through your objectives and really unpack kind of why each of those objectives are really important to the ministry, this is a space to be able to write more about it, to remind your leaders about the passion and conviction behind what was said. But again, this is optional. Some of us enjoy writing and some of us don't, so don't feel pressured about that. But if you enjoy it and you'd like to use it, the template's available. We also have, as Marty mentioned, we have several different forms of listening guides available. So depending on how much time that you have to be able to do listening time or what type of format that you want, you'll get copies of these and you can customize them however you want. We also have a PowerPoint template. This PowerPoint template is already set up with all of the pieces that we've discussed throughout this training process. I have a printout of screenshots here, but you'll be able to download this, and it already has MDI branding on it. It already has each of the sections of information that we talked through, so you can use it as a guide when you're leading these sessions. But it's also customizable, so if there's a section that you're going to change, you can tweak it in here for whatever the purpose is of the session that you're leading. But that is available and will be included in your packets. Our office is always here and available to you, so if there's anything else that you need from us, always feel free to reach out.
In closing, remember that you're setting the tone for this whole time, and you want this time to feel really set apart. So relax, enjoy it. Don't make it feel too bored-like. Set a comfortable atmosphere where sharing is encouraged, collaboration is highly valued, and new ideas are welcome. We've talked about praying in advance, listening for the Holy Spirit's movement in the moment, and trusting in God to lead you each step of the way. God will always know more than what we do. God knows the heart of and what is inside the heart of the leader you're working with. He has set your leadership under His authority. So we encourage you to lean on Him, but also do it very expectantly because God will move. And don't forget to let all of us at MDI pray for you when you have a strategic planning time. That's one of the joys of what we get to do, is come alongside you as our mentor and mentor consultants. And we want to end by just saying thank you. Thank you for sharing your hearts. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge, and for loving our leaders well. MDI couldn't do this without you, and so we thank you.
We do thank you, and at the beginning we said that we hoped that this process would put you at ease and give you confidence. Marty and I really care about that, and if there's anything at the end of this that you feel you didn't understand, or you may want to talk about to us personally about it, our office is always open to you, and we will talk about this all day long if that's what you want. So please come in if there's been any confusion. But we do thank you. God bless you. And as we said before, we hope that you have the experience of doing the strategic planning in the near future, and have the same kind of experience that Marty have had and I've had so many times.
Thank you.